Hey guys, this is Nia. Welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing a blueberry tutorial. This was suggested by someone quite a long time ago. I actually did this before, but I didn't end up posting it because I didn't really like what I made. So I decided to refilm it, and here it is. If I recall correctly, I think she commented about not being able to paint the roundness of the blueberries. So to start this off, I'm just going to go over the main shape of the blueberry by drawing it out. If you look at it from the side, the shape isn't actually round, but it's kind of an oval. However, if you look at it from the top, it's a circle. So the overall 3D shape is like a flattened orb. I'm just going to roughly show the contour of this shape from the side so you get a better dimension of it. It really helps if you have the subject right in front of you, but if you don't, then Googling the image or just looking at Pinterest also really helps. On top of the blueberry, there's this star shape opening, and these can either close up and create the star shape, or it can flap out. And on the bottom, there's a small dot where the blueberries are attached to the branches of the tree where they grow. So that technically makes the top part, but I'm just going to refer the top and the bottom as how the blueberries are usually portrayed in paintings. Now imagine a flat orb from different angles. If you were only to draw it as circle outlines, then it becomes quite difficult to visualize. So what I like to do is to suggest the shape by including the top part of the blueberry. And to begin with, I'm just going to suggest this as circles instead of the star shapes. If you look at a blueberry from the side as I have drawn at the top and the bottom wouldn't really show. But if you look at it from bird's eye view straight down, then it becomes a perfect circle. And if you move this around on certain angles, then they become ovals of different thickness. I'm talking about the center or the star shape of the blueberries here, because the next step to this is placing the contours of the flat shapes that we've drawn out to help us better visualize the roundness of these berries. So repeat this step as many times as you like, trying so many different angles, because this is the key to making your blueberries rounder, is by getting this visualization of it when you paint. Once you're happy with doing individual berries, then you can start drawing a bunch of them in a composition and follow the steps again. You can vary the sizes and the angles in the composition, and this time also try including the star shapes in different angles. Draw them out as circles or ovals first. It will really help you a lot with the placement of the stars, because it'll also vary depending on which angle you draw this out. Now I'm just going to do the colors. I'm going to cover the colors of the blueberries first, and the main colors that I'll use is this ultramarine blue with a mixture of Payne's gray. You want the Payne's gray to be quite light because you don't want the ultramarine to look too dark, and also try to mix this together and see different consistencies and different variations of how muted or how bright of the blue you want it to be. As you can see, I like to mix my paints loosely on the palette. I'm just letting them flow next to each other, adding more of each color on the side. This is just my way of painting, but if you would like to put them on separate corners, that's also okay. Just try to find what works best for you. This is optional, but I decided to include shadows and leaves for the final painting, but this is just an extra added detail, so I'm not going to go over the shapes in detail, but I'll just let you know what colors I'll be using. For the shadows, I decided to use Purple Lake with a mixture of the blue that we've used for the blueberries, creating this deeper purple, and I like how it brightens out the painting, but shadows can literally be any color you want. For the leaves, I'm just going to be using 4 colors, which is the Viridian and the Sap Green for the greens. And to mute these colors, I'm going to use Crimson and Yellow Ochre to make the greens a little bit more warm. Now I'm just going to paint one lone blueberry as an example of how I'd go about painting this, and after that we can sketch out the full painting, but of course you may also create your own composition. Firstly, I'm just going to put a wash of the blue mixture, which is the ultramarine and the Payne's Gray, and I'm purposefully not creating a flat wash, but I want it to be textured from the very beginning. Then I wait for this to dry and add a little bit more Payne's Gray to the mixture so you can create a deeper blue, and we're just going to paint some of them on top. Be mindful to not put too much gray, like here I decided to take some off so it doesn't look too muddy. Always be mindful of the contour while adding the texture and shadows. Visualizing the contour really helps your brush move in the direction where the shadows and the highlights would land. After you wait for this layer to dry, then I'm just going to use a thick consistency of the same blue mixture, and we can paint the star shape. You can draw this out first if you're not comfortable doing it freehand, but I'm just going to go straight in. Now I'm using the same thick consistency paint, and I'm going to paint the bottom left. As you can see, whenever I'm painting shadows or texture, I never paint it straight. Notice that I always paint the lines as it would look like as the contour. This is the key of making your blueberries round. If your shadows look too harsh, you can lighten this up by using clean wet brush to distribute the paint. To add the final highlights, I like to create some texture with my white pen, and I'm just lightly making some white marks on the side. Then I'm going to finish this off by mixing the purple lake into the blue mixture, and since the light is coming from the top right, my shadows are going to be on the bottom left. There's a little trick that I use in the final painting with this white pen. I didn't do it for this quick paint demo though, but I will go over it later in the final painting. To finish off, I'm just going to redefine the purple of the shadow and also the shadow reflecting on the blueberry. And now I'm just going to sketch out the composition that I like. I'm using pencil first just to make it safe because I don't really have anything in mind at the moment. And this time I'm also going to draw out the middle of the blueberries as an indication of what the angle of the blueberry should be. I'm just going to draw them out as circles or ovals, so it wouldn't really get too much in the way of painting, but feel free to sketch out whatever you're comfortable with. Before I begin to paint, I usually like to mix quite a bit of paint to put on my palette so I can keep going back to it instead of reactivating the paint, at least for a few blueberries. I'm going to start by painting the base color of the blueberries as we did in the quick demo, and remember to keep the texture of the paint whenever you can. Because we are doing a bunch of blueberries all at once, I'm going to skip a blueberry at a time so the paint doesn't run across or bleed across all blueberries. Make sure to keep them separated because the texture of the paint might not run according to the curves of the blueberries. So do this to keep the painting cleaner. After you do this, make sure that the paint is fairly dry and you can paint the base colors for the rest of the blueberries. I'm also going to leave out some white where the blueberries are touching, just for added definition. Now, instead of doing layers straight away, I'm just going to place the middle of the blueberries or the star shapes to remind myself of the angles. In the demo, I did a few layers, but you don't always need to make as many layers. It all depends on preference and whatever you have put down on paper. If you feel like you have enough color, texture, shadows, and highlights, and it only takes a couple of layers, then that's fine. The point is, we just keep building it up until we are satisfied with what we have. The key is also knowing when to stop, because you don't want a painting to look too overworked. To do the next layer now, I'm using a thicker consistency than the first layer, and I'm just going to place it down as we did before, following the curvature of each blueberry. I'm going to do this one by one, and each time I place down the new layer, because the previous layer is completely dry, the paint looks very harsh. So I'm going to soften it by using a clean damp brush and spreading out the darker colors across. I'm still keeping in mind the texture and the curvature, and whenever you feel like your brush absorbed too much of the paint already, clean it again and keep softening it. And then I'm just going to do the exact steps for the other blueberries. I'm going to add another layer to some of the blueberries that I feel still needs a little bit of work, but for the ones that I feel has enough texture and color, I won't be adding more at this stage. Once you're happy with the main blueberry colors, I'm going to move on to the highlights. And here's the little trick. As I mentioned before, I like to create highlights with my white pen. This Unibal Signo gel pen is actually water soluble, so when I use it to add some of the highlights, If and when the white looks a little bit too much or too harsh, I can actually use the same technique as we did for the blueberry textures, and that is to use a clean damp brush to soften the highlights. You can use the damp brush to spread out some of the white, creating softer and more subtle highlights that won't look too out of place because blueberries aren't usually too shiny unless it's glazed. Of course, you can also use white gouache, but I find that using this pen is just more convenient for small pieces like this one. I'm going to add a small dot at the middle point of each blueberries, and I'm also going to add additional highlights along the flap of the star shape because this gel pen is fairly thick. It will look a little bit out of place, but that's why you can use the same technique to soften the edges or the white color to be more translucent. Now I'm going to add the shadows like I previously did. I'm going to use the purple lake and mix it with the blue and paints gray. And I'm going to use the same light source, so I'm going to paint the shadow along the bottom left corner. I always like to start quite light and build up on the color where the shadow touches the blueberries because that part will always be the darker and the shadow will soften up as it disappears. This was a last minute decision, but I ended up painting some leaves just for accents. This is why I didn't initially made a drawing out of the leaves before. I also made the color chart after I've painted this, but I'm sure it's quite self-explanatory. I made the brown using Viridian and Crimson just because that's what I had on my palette. I decided to just draw a few leaves along the back of the blueberries. You may omit this step though because this tutorial is mainly about how to paint the roundness of the blueberries. So I'm almost done with this painting. I hope you enjoyed watching it and learned something new. Like usual, if you decide to give this a go and would like to show me, you can tag me on my Instagram account at ig_nyanyani. If you would like to see more tutorials, I also have a playlist on how to paint flowers. They're really easy watercolor tutorials, or you can follow me on Skillshare where I make longer classes from half an hour to 1.5 hours long. Thank you for watching till the very end, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye!